Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The city shimmered in the late sunlight, casting golden reflections on the glass and steel facades. In the streets lined with impeccably manicured trees and luxury cars, everything seemed peaceful. But beneath this veneer of perfection, silent tensions simmered. Angela Brooks walked with measured steps along the sidewalk, holding a black leather briefcase in her right hand. At 42, she exuded a natural elegance, enhanced by a perfectly tailored suit and understated yet refined pumps. Her neatly styled hair and direct gaze inspired confidence. Yet, behind this apparent calm, Angela carried years of inner strength, forged through the hardships and injustices she had silently endured. As she reached her car, a black Mercedes with tinted windows, a minor incident occurred. A young delivery driver, in a hurry, lightly bumped the front fender of her vehicle. Angela politely apologized and offered to pay for the damages. But the witnesses didn't need to know these details. The two police officers patrolling nearby saw a black woman, alone, impeccably dressed, and calm. In their minds, she immediately embodied a suspicion they couldn't rationally justify. "Madam, you must stay here," shouted one of the policemen, a white man with a tight jaw, known in the neighborhood for his arrogance and impatience. Angela looked up at him fearlessly and replied calmly, "I don't understand. I haven't done anything wrong." But her composure was perceived only as pride. The second policeman, impatient and younger, approached to surround her. Passers-by began to gather, drawn by the growing tension. Angela felt their gazes, some intrigued, others suspicious. She knew, from that moment, that what was about to happen would not be a simple verbal confrontation. What no one knew was that Angela possessed a rare strength, a silent power, a presence that commanded respect and influence without her needing to raise her voice or touch anyone. A force that even the most arrogant police officers couldn't ignore once it was awakened. And on that day, in that seemingly ordinary street, that strength would reveal itself for the first time to the world, and to the men who had tried to humiliate it. Angela Brooks breathed calmly, trying not to let on the anger that was simmering inside her. The two police officers surrounded her, their movements abrupt and their looks filled with contempt. One of them, the older one, pointed a finger at her. "You must follow us, madam. Now." Angela shook her head slightly, her voice remained calm but firm. "I haven't done anything wrong. You have no reason to arrest me." The young, impatient, and arrogant police officer tried to grab her arm. Angela took a step back, dodging his move with a precision that surprised him. Passers-by began to murmur, some taking out their phones to film. But the police officers seemed indifferent, confident in their authority. "Stop resisting," shouted the old man. Angela raised her hands in a gesture of peace, but the tone of her eyes and the posture of her body reflected a quiet strength. Every movement was measured, every gesture controlled. She knew that the anger and aggression of the police officers were tools. She had to let them reveal themselves. The young police officer, irritated, gave her a slight push. Angela staggered, but didn't fall. A shocked exclamation rose from the crowd. Several passers-by intervened, calling out, "Leave her alone." But the police officers scoffed at these protests. The public humiliation was complete. Angela, a black woman, alone, stood facing two white men in uniform, bound by the law but abusing their power. Angela took a deep breath. Her thoughts were clear. "What they don't know is that I'm not vulnerable. And that they know nothing about me." As one of the police officers began to shout at her, she felt that strange energy within her, ready to erupt. It wasn't the time to attack yet. For now, she had to let the officers' pride and frustration build, because the more they exposed themselves, the more devastating their eventual humiliation would be. The passers-by, fascinated, didn't look away. Some shuddered at the contrast between the gratuitous violence of the police and Angela's sovereign calm. Little by little, a palpable tension settled in the air. Something was about to happen, and no one in the street yet knew that this woman, so unassuming on the surface, held a power capable of changing the course of this confrontation. The tension in the street reached its peak. Passers-by held their breath, frozen in a mixture of fear and fascination. The two police officers, until then so sure of themselves, began to feel a strange unease, a sense of imbalance they couldn't explain. Angela Brooks remained motionless for a few moments, breathing deeply. Her gaze swept the scene, the police officers, the crowd, the surrounding cars. Then, almost imperceptibly, she focused. A subtle yet powerful energy emanated from her, slightly altering the perception of those around her. The wind seemed to slow, the sounds of the street became more distant, and every movement of the police officers appeared hesitant. The older man, with an authoritarian air, tried to advance to handcuff her. But his steps seemed to falter, his gait becoming clumsy. His younger colleague, more nervous, stammered out contradictory orders. "Back up." "No, wait." Angela did nothing spectacular. She didn't shout, she didn't gesticulate. She simply remained calm, maintaining her straight and imposing posture. Yet, her presence had become an invisible force that commanded respect and unease. Passers-by began to murmur. "What's going on? It seems like they're hesitating." One of the officers tried to raise his hand to signal an arrest, but his arm trembled slightly. The other, frustrated, glanced at his colleague, as if desperately searching for a way out. Both men were losing control, not because of Angela herself, but because of the quiet strength she exuded. Angela took a slow, deliberate step forward, never taking her eyes off the police officers. Her voice, calm but firm, echoed through the air. "I advise you to make a wise decision. Mine is simple: I'm leaving, and you remain worthy of your uniform." The younger policeman took a step back, unable to meet her gaze. His colleague, his face red with anger and embarrassment, finally lowered his eyes, sensing that this woman would never be intimidated. In that split second, the balance of power had shifted, the humiliation would now be reversed. Shocked and fascinated, passers-by began to applaud softly, some murmuring their admiration. The police, symbols of authority, were now laid bare before a black woman who had used neither violence nor threats, but simply her presence and her unwavering calm. Angela took another step, then another, as if to show that she controlled not only the situation but the entire space around her. The police officers no longer dared to make a move. The confrontation had reached its critical point, the tipping point was imminent. Silence had fallen over the street, heavy and almost electric. Even the wind seemed to have stopped, as if suspended to observe the scene. Angela Brooks, motionless, inspired an immediate and irresistible respect. The police officers, despite their usual arrogance, sensed a tension they couldn't control. Angela finally spoke, her clear and measured voice resonating in the air. "I advise you to let me go. It will save you complications." Her words contained no threat, and yet each syllable weighed heavily on the minds of those listening. The older man tried to reply, but his words were lost in a mixture of confusion and doubt. He felt an invisible force preventing him from asserting himself, an energy that seemed to emanate from Angela's mere presence. The young policeman, for his part, instinctively stepped back, his hands trembling. He felt as if the air around Angela resisted his every move. The stunned passers-by then understood that this woman was no ordinary person. The murmurs turned into admiring whispers. "Who is she? How could she?" Angela took another step toward her car, her movements fluid and confident. Every detail of her posture, every glance, was calculated. The police officers tried to maintain control, but it was now impossible, their arrogance had crumbled. As the younger man made a move to handcuff her, he was repelled by an invisible, subtle yet undeniable force. He staggered slightly, enough to seal the humiliation. The older man, red with shame and unable to react, looked at his colleague and the crowd, realizing they were now victims of their own prejudice and arrogance. Angela stopped in front of her Mercedes, placed her hand on the door, and turned around one last time. Her eyes, calm but piercing, met those of the police officers. "I leave it to you to decide whether you remain representatives of the law, or men humiliated by their own incompetence." Then, without waiting for their reply, she got into her car and drove off slowly. The crowd erupted in murmurs and applause. The police officers remained frozen, stunned, unable to understand how a single woman had managed to completely reverse the balance of power, without violence or direct threats. That day, on an unassuming city street, Angela Brooks revealed her true power, a presence and authority so strong that they commanded respect and fear, even from the most arrogant. The police officers, for their part, had to confront the reality of their own humility. The next morning, the city was still buzzing with Angela Brooks's story. Videos filmed by passers-by were already circulating on social media. Everywhere, people were talking about this elegant, calm black woman who had humiliated two arrogant police officers without raising her voice. But for Angela, it had never been about glory. Her goal was simple: to command respect and remind everyone that true power lies not in the uniform, but in self-control and inner strength. In her apartment overlooking the city, Angela watched the news, a slight smile playing on her lips. Reporters were trying to contact her for an interview, fascinated by how she had neutralized authority with her mere presence. She knew some saw it as a miracle, others as a simple psychological effect. But all were struck by the extent of her control. Meanwhile, the two police officers were facing pressure from their superiors. Their superiors had reviewed the videos and, faced with the evidence, had to publicly acknowledge their mistake. Their arrogance had been exposed, and their inability to handle the situation had gone viral. Some officers in the city even began to whisper, ashamed, about the humiliation they had inflicted. Angela, for her part, never sought revenge. She used her experience to launch conferences on leadership, self-control, and natural authority, subtly sharing her message: true power is not measured by strength or title, but by presence, intelligence, and dignity. Passers-by on the street where it all began continued to talk about the event for weeks. Angela had transformed a moment of humiliation into a public lesson in respect and reverse justice. The police officers, for their part, had to live with the shame of having underestimated a black woman, alone and calm, capable of completely changing the dynamics of a confrontation. And throughout the entire city, a clear message had spread: true power is not always seen, but it is felt, and those who thought they could intimidate without consequence would now think twice. Angela Brooks continued her life, more respected and admired than ever, leaving behind an indelible lesson: respect is not imposed by fear, but by the silent strength of those who know who they truly are.